Hi there, welcome to Torre Abbey Gardens and our Naughty by Nature exploration of all things slightly rude, a little bit naughty, and very interesting, I hope, here in the gardens themselves. So I am sat already by a meddler, look at that, otherwise known as the dog's bottom or the cat's bottom. You can sort of see why, can't you? And that's the thing. So, I mean, we think of gardens as quite pretty places. We look at the flowers, we look at that. But of course, in reality, behind every flower, behind everything, is a whole host of stories going on. And actually, the way we name plants, for example, reflects back at us, our preoccupations through history and time. The things that we find interesting is reflected in the plants that we grow. So all the way through, at the moment we're in the medieval garden. Since time began, flowers and plants have always meant something to us, a bit more than just the way they look. And I'm sat actually with a humble cucumber, slightly odd-shaped cucumber. For a medieval monk, this was a plant that they had to eat a lot of because it helped stop lust. It was considered to be a cold plant, as distinct from something like pepper, which was hot and would induce lust, that kind of thing. Later on, we have botanists trying to define plants in a certain way, trying to classify them. The Victorians loved their language of flowers, that they spoke to each other in terms of love by secret messages. And today, even today, we still play with names. There are some classic names out there, modern ones. So we're going to go on a bit of a journey here. So let's start with the very basics. According to one of my volunteers, when it comes to plant, it's all about sex. And that's quite true. So the flowers, the things that we love so much in our gardens, are simply reproductive organs. And if you look closely, you can often see them. And the language that we use about them also represents the way that we approach our own sexuality. So in most cases, about 85% of plants, flowering plants, are actually bisexual, in that they have the male organs, known as stamens and anthers, and the female organs, known as pistils, on the same flower. But there are others that do things slightly differently. So my pumpkins here, and most of this family, they have male and female flowers on the same plant. And sometimes you can tell they will only produce pumpkins on the female one. So you can see a baby there. There you go, that's a female flower and a male flower. Whereas my kiwi, my great big kiwi, this has male and female flowers on completely different plants. And the language that we use, which is admittedly from the Greek or the Latin, tends to reflect that. So we talk about things like monoecious, which is Greek for one household. We talk about things that are dioecious, which is two households. So this is dioecious. Most plants are monoecious. And we use that language in so many different ways. So in the plant world, there are even plants that are, very few of them, considered to be gender fluid. So there's a South African plant, a solanum, which has male flowers and female flowers and changes its mind every now and again. So don't be fooled, it's all different and it's all rather wonderful. So before Linnaeus invented or developed his system of binomial naming, which is most famous, he also worked on a classification of flowers according to their sexuality, if you like. So his language and his words, plants were places, flowers were places where things got married. So this was the bridal chamber, and there were wives and there were husbands and concubines, and he developed this whole system based on the way that we as humans actually organise our lives, and applied it to plants. When he came to England to persuade English botanists that it was a really good idea, his system, they were not too impressed at all. And all his descriptions were really quite rude. I can't say most of them. So they called it lewd. They thought it was like a sort of tour around a prostitute's bedroom. They absolutely hated it. And it was a long time before they would trust Linnaeus again, although he turned out to be an absolute genius in the whole thing. So, apart from Linnaeus' obsession with sexuality, there are lots of other ways that flowers reflect back our own kind of preoccupations. One of the things I'm most interested in is the language of flowers, which for the Victorians was a kind of slightly innocent way of sending secret messages to each other by sending a bouquet of flowers, and each one had a specific message. But it actually developed from an idea in Turkey where harem ladies would send secret messages outside the harem under the noses of the guards by using flowers. And it became popular largely due to an English lady called Lady Montagu, who was the ambassador's wife, who wrote back to her friends about this sort of super sexy way of communicating. And at the time, Orientalism was the big thing. Harems were sexy, flowers were sexy, and everything about it was a sort of sexy, slightly naughty thing. So the Victorians picked up on it very quickly. So I'm by dahlias, which apparently mean treachery. That's because I'm in the Agatha Christie Potent Plants display. And Agatha Christie herself really understood the language of plants. So the vast majority of people, non-horticulturalists, tend to use common names for plants. But again, they too can have some slightly naughty implications. So I am stood right next to Amaryllis belladonna, but which is otherwise known as the naked lady. You can also get Dicentra, sometimes known as naked lady in a bath. There is the naked man orchid, although that's a double whammy, that one, but I'll explain that later. Naked nannies, which are colchicums, I believe. There's a whole load of common names which all represent our views on how things are. Common names are wonderful. And if all that naked lady stuff makes you think that all botanists were clearly male, I could also tell you about plants called Stinking Willy or Sticky Willy, or one of my favourites, which is not flowering at the moment, which is the hairy ball plant, sometimes known as the family jewels milkweed. That's a joy. So my favourite common name, I think this was the moment when I realised that I wasn't just the only one who sniggered at some of these things, is this beautiful anthurium, known by the common name of Willy on a plate. And I learnt that from a wizard gardener. So common names can be great fun, and most ordinary gardeners use common names all the time, but obviously professional horticulturalists, we are required to use the binomial system of classification, which is of course based on Latin. So I'm calling this bit my Incontinentia buttocks section, thanks to Life of Brian, of course. There are a lot of ways by accident or by design that you can use Latin to make some quite rude plant names. Unfortunately, well, fortunately for both students, but very unfortunately, I suppose, for lecturers who are a bit unwary, a great many plant names end in the suffix anus, which if you write it down or if you say it incorrectly can lead you to all sorts of difficulties. So again, I'm not particularly keen on saying these out loud, so I have put them on a card for you, and I want to see if you can pronounce them yourselves. So for example, we have this, which is a white bramble, but again, I'm not going to say it. And this one, if you say it a certain way, it's quite funny. But my absolute favourite, and you do have to slightly mispronounce it, is this one, which is quite famous now amongst horticulturalists, I think. So you can work on that, say it yourself a few times, see what comes out. So, using Latin means that sometimes you get these kind of accidental, funny names, but sometimes they're actually quite spot on. So here are my orchids. and they get their name. They were named by the Greeks, who first found an orchid and noticed there were two little tubular things at the bottom. So they named it orchis, which simply means testicles. And just for the record, so does avocado in the South American language. And vanilla, which is something that we all use, is actually Spanish for small lady parts, just so you know. So here in our arid house are some brilliant examples of plants which are, sort of say it like it is, they are plants with definite resemblances to parts of the female or the male body. So there's quite a lot of cacti like this, named mammillaria, which is of course Latin for breast. So they're quite often called the nipple cacti. Others you can see as you look around are a little bit more phallic in nature. And in fact the most famous of the cacti that looks rather like the male member is the Echinops. Echinops laganiformis monstrosa is very definitely slightly naughty. So many of these names are named after certain body parts. You can blame Linnaeus for that once again. He was quite determined to use his classification system that I talked about before in his naming of plants, of which he invented the whole system. So we do have some rather unfortunate names which are quite difficult to say, and so instead I've put them on cards. There are plants like this, the crassula, yellow crassula, which again I'm not going to say out loud. This is the butterfly pea, and you have to imagine what it might look like, or you could go and look it up yourself, of course. And very wonderfully, the phallus impudicus, and this little beauty, the common stinkhorn. Its bigger cousin is very famously seen on TV once every 7 years. It flowers the Titan arum, which is actually called Amorphophallus. And I know that the name Titanarum was apparently invented by David Attenborough, who found its real name a little bit difficult to say on TV. So, but that is a 7-foot beauty. So last but not least, modern plant naming. Of course, these days we all love our plants. There's lots of plant breeders around, and I'm not quite sure whether they always mean to name something the way they do, or whether they know exactly what they're doing. So, for example, there is a very lovely rose known as Rosa Golden Showers. Was that deliberate or not? Who knows? I mean, something like Sexy Rexy, that probably was. And I think that's where I'll leave it. So my name is Ali Marshall. I'm the head gardener here at Torre Abbey, and I hope to see you all soon. Ooh, Mrs.